After mulling it over last night, I decided that this vinyl, just sitting here on the roll and the little bit I've touched it, it's picked up a lot of fingerprints. I don't know if once you installed it and wiped it down, if it would look better, but eventually you'd end up touching it anyway, being that it's on the door. So I thought that long term, the carbon fiber would probably actually look better. It does a great job of concealing imperfections in the plastic, but it also doesn't really show any fingerprints. I think I'm pretty happy with that result. The vinyl wrap lays down really easily, so that was good. And you know, that's basically what it looks like on this small part. This is definitely not going to be a how-to on vinyl wrapping, just because there's probably people that are way better at it than I am that you can go check out. A few tips that I will mention, because inevitably it will make this job easier. If you're going to do this, go ahead and pick up the primer, 3M Primer 94. And this piece, I just did it and I've let it dry. It's almost like watery substance that kind of goes on, primarily focused around edges, you know, where I know the vinyl is going to have to be bent and pulled taut. I try to put some primer on there. That'll just help it bond and stick. And of course, before I applied this, and I cleaned the parts down really well, and I wiped them down with alcohol, so they should be super clean. And I'm wearing some gloves just to stop some oils from getting on there, but once you got the wrap laid on, you could take the gloves off and use your fingers to kind of pull the wrap around. Make sure you've got some sharp razors or cutting utensils, because that'll really help when you get this wrap kind of rolled around. You'll be able to cut it and trim it. And of course, you know, you can get these little wrap tools and stuff. And for me, I'm using my trusty old hair dryer. This gets plenty hot to work the carbon fiber. I'm here in my shop. It's not like I'm dealing with the cold outside or anything like that. The hair dryer applies enough heat, and it's actually controllable. Maybe in the tightest of places, it would be worth using a heat gun where you could really get the wrap hot. This piece was actually super easy to do because it's basically flat and just a little bit of curvature. So I think it turned out really well. This is the rest of the driver's side door trim. It won't be terrible because again, it's a nice sweeping curve. So the only trick here is going to be getting everything cut around these openings. So that one will be pretty easy. The passenger side will be a much bigger challenge because it's trying to make a very tight sweep in that wrap. So my plan is to lay the wrap down and follow this natural curve. And then once I've done that, I'll have to see how much stretch I've got to start pulling it around the sides here. I only bought one roll, and it'll be plenty if you did this, you know, the first time, but if I screw up a big piece, I may not have enough wrap. So I'll have to be really careful. And last thing I'll mention real quick is that if you're using a wrap that has, well, carbon fiber or any kind of texture or design to it, you'll want to pay attention to the pattern and make sure it's continuous, because if you accidentally rotate the piece and the pattern's going the opposite way, or you don't get the pattern lined up, it'll be extremely obvious and people will notice it right away. So this piece here butts into the end of that piece, so when I go to cut my next piece of vinyl, I'll need to make sure that I've got at least the same orientation and then enough wiggle room. I can go ahead and line up the same pattern on the carbon fiber. I need to get this stuff moved out of my way because I need to kind of lay my wrap out to get a big enough piece to figure out what I need to cut. As always, I'll have links to all this stuff down in the description below. And again, thanks to Clay Spec on Instagram. I'll put a link to his information down below. He's got a really cool build. You should check it out. He was the one that recommended this product. I'll check back in once I've got this piece cut, maybe do a time lapse of me laying this piece on. Of course, my battery would die while I was in the middle of trying to get this wrapped. I went ahead and finished this while I was waiting for some batteries to charge. So yeah, it did get a little tight in this area where the bend starts to happen, but as long as you're applying heat, it's really pliable. So, you know, getting it worked around all these lips, I just use kind of different tools, my fingernail to kind of get it around in there. So I'm really happy with the way that turned out. I mean, it looks pretty awesome. So I'll set that one aside. And of course, the next one is going to be more complicated because it has a much tighter bend. And what I kind of learned with this one was that it's really better to have excess wrap, because it will start, it gives you something to pull, but also, you know, it's kind of hard to predict how much material is going to get used around some of these bends. I'll try to make sure my battery is charged for this one. I'll probably just start at this end and work my way, you know, this way, but I'm hoping it'll work out okay. And using enough heat, it'll eventually fit. So anyway, I'll go ahead and get this piece wrapped, and then that should be the last of the pieces that I have to get wrapped. And then I might need to work a little bit more on the door handle for the passenger door. So yeah, anyway, Let's see if the batteries stay charged this time. This one proved to be a real challenge to wrap because of this part as well as this curvature. So my wrap job turned out like garbage. Maybe on a rainy day I'll pull it back out and either I'll have to buy some more wrap or figure out what I'm gonna do with these long term. But for my temporary solution, it'll just have to do. With those parts done, I can go back and focus on the handle, and I think my repairs are gonna be plenty strong for what it needs to do. I use some epoxy in my staples to hold it together, so I think that's going to be fine. And when I pulled the cover off, I was careful to cut it in such a way that if I had to reuse it, it wouldn't be the end of the world to get that reattached and put back on there. I do have a scrap piece of leather that was laying around my shop. If I trace this on here, cut this out, try to attach that and get this cut, and then see what it'll take. Probably use some adhesive and stitch it on as well. I'm gonna need to grab a few tools and some markers and things. Let me get everything organized, and then we'll go ahead and get this traced onto the leather and get it cut out. We're gonna have to ignore the fact that, of course, my handle was filled with epoxy by a previous owner. But when this is assembled from the factory, there's actually a kind of a thin flat spot that runs down the inside of the handle. So I just took a razor and cut down through that. And when you do that, you're able to basically peel this off really easy. So if you have this, don't throw it away, because we're gonna need it to kind of make some, not really a template, but just to get some rough dimensions. You're gonna wanna probably get a hold of some clamps. I just happen to have a lot of these little small spring clamps. And of course, some cutting utensils. Razor is probably about the only thing you're gonna need, but scissors might help. And then eventually you're gonna need something to poke holes wherever you're gonna stitch on your new cover. For the materials, I have scrap pieces of black leather, which is probably what I'm gonna use. I do have this fake vinyl leather. I would probably not use something like this because it doesn't have a lot of, it has stretch, but I don't think it's gonna really like hold its shape, and you may get some wrinkles, but you certainly could use something like that. I think it would work, but not as good as leather. These are just scrap pieces of leather I keep around my shop because you never know when you're gonna have to cover a vise or a handle or something, and this just holds up way better than trying to use an old t-shirt or something. So I found a couple pieces that are at least as big as the original cover. And really the only main difference between these two pieces is the texture. This is a very smooth textured leather, and this is much more rough. So this is what we're gonna be trying to do today. And I did use the smooth leather to make this one. And once I made it, it's fine, it looks good, but it almost looks just like molded plastic, so because it's so smooth. So today, the one we're gonna make, I'm gonna try to use this textured leather and see if the look of it turns out better than the smooth leather. And then of course you're gonna need some sort of heavy duty string. I just happen to have one that it says it's outdoor. I don't know what that specifically means, but it's a heavy duty thread. We're gonna need that to sew this on. You could also use some adhesive, and I may just use some spray adhesive in a couple areas just to kind of help hold it in place. But for the most part, I'm gonna make sure the handle is nice and tight, and then we can really snug it down with a thread. So this is a really easy project, other than maybe finding some scrap pieces of leather. And I bought a pack of this cut leather just super cheap somewhere a few years ago. If I can find a link to something similar, I'll put it down in the description below. Next thing I need to do is rough out this shape that we're gonna need. You're gonna wanna leave it a little large all around because that'll give us some adjustability, and we're gonna need some extra material to use our clamps to pull everything together. So you could just mark this out with a pencil, or get a white crayon or something, but what I'll do is just lay this flat, eyeball it, and then I'll use a straight edge to kind of slice down. So I'll get this cleared out of my way and go grab a piece of cardboard so I can cut on top of it, and we'll get this cut out. With the leather piece roughly cut to at least, being oversized from the shape of the handle, the next thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna water form this leather. And I am no expert in any of this stuff. I've done it enough just to know that it can be done and that it's relatively simple. So this leather has been treated, so it's not gonna absorb water very well, but I do have a little container of warm water. What I'm gonna do is hold this down under the water for like 30 seconds or something in that, just to make sure that I can get this as saturated as possible. Then we're gonna dab off all the extra water, and then at that point we should be able to start forming it onto the handle. So just go ahead and drop this in there and make sure it just kind of absorbs the water. Use my fingers to kind of help, because some of the air bubbles will kind of stop that grain from taking the water. So just kind of working it around to get some moisture into the leather. The camera probably won't pick it up, but as it sits here soaking in the water, you'll see bubbles coming out of the leather as the water absorbs in. But again, I just need to do it for like 30 seconds just to get enough moisture into the leather that it becomes a little more pliable. And the function here is that when we mold it and stretch it and get it into the shape that we want, and then we let it dry, it'll hold that shape. So just gonna dab off any excess moisture just so that it's not dripping everywhere. With the leather nice and saturated now, the trick is gonna be positioning this so that we make sure that we have plenty of excess all around, which if I, even if I did it like that, it looks like we're gonna have plenty of extra. What I found is to kind of center it. So I'm just using these fingers back here to hold the leather against the handle, and then I'm just slowly pulling the leather as hard as I can around, and using my thumb and my fingers to kind of help pull that leather into shape. So, once it's around, you can start pinching it and pulling and stretching as much as you can. And arguably this leather seems to be a little bit thicker than the one I made over here, because I'm already feeling like this is a little tighter. But you don't want to wear any jewelry or rings or have sharp nails, because anything you do that you press into the leather, it's gonna hold that shape, and you can get it out if you redo this process. But I would recommend just avoiding the headache and not wearing anything that could scratch, and working on a soft surface. So you're just gonna keep working this and working it, and as you can see, it's gonna start pulling into the shape of the handle. But the idea is, once you've gotten it nice and tight somewhere, like here on this end, you can go ahead and start applying clamps along this edge. And again, you wanna apply everything nice and tight so that when it's drying, it's holding that shape. But I'm just gonna keep using my thumbs to kind of work around the curvature a little bit, and kind of into where we've got all these different lips and shapes. And I may not have mentioned this very clearly earlier, but you want to end up with your stitching on the inside, towards the door panel, so that it's easier to conceal. And if you happen to make a goof, it'll be easier to cover up in the back than it will be in the anywhere else. So again, just holding it tight and applying as many clamps as I can fit on here. Okay, I'm really happy now that that is really tight and secure. So now it just becomes a waiting game. I will let this dry about 24 hours just to make sure we get all the moisture out. Once this is dry, we're gonna go around, kind of use the original cover as a template and some of the lines, and then just take a razor and start cutting the leather to match the existing handle. The existing handle cover is relatively thin, but it does have like this kind of sticky foam kind of padding on it. I would say, all things considered, the leather is not all that thicker than what was already on there. So I don't think fitment is going to be a huge issue. I will leave the ends a little bit long, so I won't cut exactly to this shape, because I do want to see if I can tuck some of this leather, which will help hold it all together once it's back in the car. I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry overnight, and then I'll check back in tomorrow. We'll get these clamps pulled off and start cutting it, and then get it sewed on. It's a little over 24 hours from the last time I checked in on this, and I think this is nice and dry. It feels like I don't feel any moisture. So I'll go ahead and remove all these clamps, and I'll just keep them handy because I might need to reuse them. And you can see that even with just the clamps removed, it's holding its shape. So I'll just put a couple clamps on here just to hold it back, make sure we don't pull it off. But we probably could go ahead and trim off the excess. For the bottom, it's pretty simple. Just follow around this line, maybe 1/8 of an inch, to the bottom. And then on the top, the shape is a little bit funny because it kind of, this one's chewed up a little bit, but it definitely has a little bit different shape. So this one, I try to be a little bit more careful about how I cut it and trying to follow the contours and like I said, just staying away from it a little bit. And then once I've got all the lines, I don't necessarily have to go all the way through the leather, but just kind of score the surface. Then I can go ahead and take this completely off and then really go to town with cutting off the excess. But at least for now, I can go and get all the lines marked. Here it is all cut out, and I probably have a little bit more trimming I want to do just because I want to make a little bit of a gap between where the two pieces meet so that when I tie this together with the thread, I can actually cinch it tight and make sure it's not going to come loose. I got a little sloppy up here at the top, which is just a little bit hard where I had extra material, but considering that's on the back side, I don't think anybody's ever going to see it. I'm going to take my pick tool, which is quite sharp, and then just come down the edges and do some equal spaced holes and just mark them. Once I've got them marked, then I'll take this off and I'll actually punch this through to make a much larger hole. And then I should be able to start threading this on. And like I said, I may do just a little bit of adhesive just in this area just to help me hold it while I'm sewing it on. But like I said, if I leave a little bit of a gap here when I cinch the thread down, it should really hold that on. And where it's molded to that shape, it's not going to go anywhere. And now that I've got this texture one made, I definitely think this is the way I'm going to go. The texture, to me, feels a little bit nicer and maybe fits better with some of the other textured materials that we've got in the car. So I'll get this trimmed up and start poking holes and then get this sewed on, and really that's it. I'll just update you guys when I've got this all installed and show you what the final product looks like. I did spray a little bit of my adhesive onto just a piece of cardboard, and then I just carefully dabbed some, kind of on the main part of the handle just to give it enough to hold it. And actually that held really well just by itself. I didn't put any kind of on this side so that I could use the stitching to kind of draw the leather tight. My stitching is not amazing, but I think that's going to do pretty good. That feels really good in the hand. I would highly recommend wrapping your handle in leather. It's really easy with the wet forming. So I kind of just have it roughly set in there, and you can see how it just tucks down around the corner there, and the top is pretty much the same way. So I don't think I'm going to have to do any trimming, and that'll just kind of be, now ignore the wrap job, I did a terrible job there, but the handle looks really good. With this handle repaired and wrapped, I think I can go ahead and start assembling the door cards. They do need a good cleaning, and there is one patch I need to make. Once I have the door cards scrubbed clean, I can start putting all this trim back into each door card. Then we can start planning on getting the speakers installed and getting everything else that we need wiring wise inside the door, get everything buttoned up, and that should complete the interior restoration of my FD. Let me get this cleaned up and grab the door cards. While repairing my door cards, I did have one area where the door card was kind of damaged. It looks like maybe something hit it, and it kind of actually rolled this little piece of material back underneath. But Took a hair dryer, got the area nice and warm, and then pulled it out. So all the material is there. I'll never probably get it to look perfect. I just used a pick tool to kind of help smooth that out, but I might apply a little bit more heat, and then I'm just going to use some standard spray adhesive, spray a little bit on like a piece of cardboard, and then dab some in here, and then try to massage it best I can. So it won't be perfect. You'll still be able to see the scratches, but at least it'll look a lot better than it did where all this material was rolled back in there. Maybe once the material's laid down, I can go back around and see about filling in the crack. But anyway, I'm gonna heat this back up and then use some spray adhesive and get that laid down. I have both door cards fully assembled, and I went ahead and used some mothers and some leather conditioner, even though it's not really leather, but it's what I had to kind of help shine this up a little bit. But got everything really clean, both sides, scrubbed it down. Pretty happy with the way the driver's side turned out. The vinyl pretty much has no imperfections. There's a little bit of a wrinkle right there, but it won't really be seen. The only other thing I didn't really tackle was the little coin tray that goes in here. It really just probably needs to be reflocked, but I probably won't even use it anyway. I'd rather have this bigger compartment where I could put my cell phone or whatever down in there. So for the time being, I'll leave it like that. This is just probably where stuff sat against the door card at some point in time and caused an indentation or kind of like a permanent dimple, which I might be able to get some heat on that and kind of help it work its way back out, but really it's fine for me. The passenger side didn't go as well. There were some issues that I ended up having with the vinyl because that is such a tight curve, but I did go ahead and redo this. I wasn't going to be happy with the way it was, so I took the time, got some more vinyl, and rewrapped it, and it went much better the second time. But as you see, there's my leather door pull, and I did go ahead and paint all these cups, and so everything on these door cards is really good shape now, and they're basically ready to go back into the car. I went ahead and replaced all the little clips. So these are all brand new, and I'll put a link in the description for the ones I got. I think I got a box of 40 of them, really cheap. Put all the fasteners back in, retaped anything that need to be retaped. My little custom brackets that I made here have worked really well because the handle is really secure now. So I think this is probably going to go a long way with making this door nice and sturdy. There was some factory foam, but I put some new foam so that was nice and secure and it wasn't going to wiggle against the door card. The only other thing I installed was some felt tape around the edge here to soften that edge, so we go and install it against the door. If there are any squeaks or anywhere that it would wiggle, hopefully it would prevent this from making any noise. Most of these are probably broken on most door cards, but I did have one fall completely off, but my plastic epoxy is held really well and that feels really secure. So yeah, these are completely ready to go back into the car. I do have the little plastic covers which were cleaned up and they're just sitting over there. So I've got the ones for inside the handles and then there, so those just need to get snapped back in. Before I put these in, I do need to get some work done on the mirrors. I'm still debating on whether or not to leave the Ganna doors on or switch back to the OEM mirrors. If I do the OEM mirrors, I think the mirrors I have are going to need to be disassembled. So that might be one of the next projects I go ahead and do, is get those mirrors out, take them apart, see what's going on. And if they're not really going to be usable, then I'll just go back to the Ganna doors for sure. I also need to go ahead and get the door speakers and the door brackets on. So that'll also be coming up as well. This really was a long process because it was, working on it here and there. And, with the holidays and everything that happened, it was a very slow process. But I did get it all done without having to buy a bunch of new parts. Other than what I already had, the only other expense was for the vinyl. Everything else, and maybe some spray paint if you don't have it. You could probably spend a few $100s per door card to get replacements that are used, maybe better condition than the ones you've got, but there's still going to be imperfections in them. Hopefully this video helps some of you guys. If you have any questions about any of this, just leave them down below and I'll get back to you. Please give the video a thumbs up if you like the content. If you're not a subscriber and you like the content, please consider subscribing. We'll be making a lot more progress on the FD over the next few months, but we're also going to be getting into some of the other project cars as well. So thank you guys for watching. I'm going to see you in the next one.